And here we have on our panel Salim, Teja, and also Dr. Joel Martin coming in. And Alison, as you know, she's going to be sticking around. And moderating this discussion is our Ivey colleague, Darren Meister, professor of entrepreneurship who has held important leadership roles before and will be returning to do more as the Associate Dean of Program. Welcome, Darren.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone, for the panel. Thank you, everyone, for staying. I think, Mahmoud, you slightly betrayed the intensity of the information that's been conveyed when you said this morning we talked about something. This morning I was on a train. And so I think we've had a great afternoon with a lot of things to react. And I want to just jump into your perspectives on building this AI ecosystem in Canada. Salim, I want to start off with you if I can. What do you think are sort of some of these key pillars from partly what you've heard this afternoon? It'd be great if we could extract some things that you went, wow, that's unusual. I wasn't expecting, and I see that as more, or just from your experience.
Yeah, I think as we've heard through all the discussions today, I think in order to create a rich environment for AI, it's going to require a multi-stakeholder strategy and coordinated initiatives in order to really help Canada win in this space. And so I do think we have to be very thoughtful about who these stakeholders are and the important role that they can play. Let's start with government. We've heard time and again that government needs to play an important role. I would argue that in many instances we fairly criticize government for certain initiatives, but on the AI file, I think that they have been exceptional in really planting the seeds of where this industry needs to go. Through the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, investing in the AI research institutes, thinking strategically about digital infrastructure, it has been amazing to sort of watch government move mountains and be very thoughtful. Our worry is that we can't slow down. Simply just launching one policy or one program is not enough. We have to keep the momentum going. The world is not slowing down, it's only speeding up. And so how can we continue to be thoughtful about investing in talent, investing in research science, investing in infrastructure and regulatory implications of what we're doing broadly for AI and on a sector by sector basis. So I think there's a whole lot there to think about. Secondly is industry. What is the role of industry and how do we solve this adoption challenge that I think industry has? And I think there we need to explore themes like how do we drive experimentation and learning, because there is a lot of excitement about AI, but still a lot of confusion about what are the value propositions that can deliver an ROI that makes sense for industries and companies. And so how do we unlock what those learnings are? And then how do we help organizations think about upskilling and cross-skilling their organizations so that they can be ready to adopt these technologies in a meaningful way. Academia plays a really important role. We have to drive activity into research, make sure we train the people that are going to be ready for these opportunities, and I think also play an important part in identifying what are the areas where Canada can win. What are the cross-disciplinary opportunities where a general purpose technology like AI can overlap with our expertise in life sciences or housing or agriculture and unlock unique capability for Canada. And then finally, investors and what role can investors play? And there I think we simply just need to let market forces allow investors to be able to pick winners and hopefully we find a lot of those anchor opportunities here in Canada. And if we get all of that right, I think what we hear is it will create incredible conditions for startups and innovators that can flourish in that kind of environment and be resilient, be bold in what they want to build. And as you've heard time and time again, many of these founders want to build here in Canada. They want to build global companies, but be based here in Canada. And how do we make sure that we create that environment where they're excited about that?
Great, thanks. Joel, how is your perspective from your vantage point of the ecosystem similar or different than Salim's?
So I think definitely, so from the government point of view, What does the government want to do? It clearly has demonstrated that the government overall, it's not just me I'm talking about, but it demonstrated overall that we want to enable the AI development. And yes, there's some boundary at which government should not go beyond. There has to be some point where government says, okay, that we've finished building the racetrack, we'll let everybody run on the racetrack. And what is that boundary? And what we're going to have to do over the next little while is continue the conversation. Hear from you what you think the problems are, what you think will be an aid without getting in the way, and there will be consultations to help in that way.
Okay, and I think we'll want to pick up on that a little bit more in the sense of, I've heard this afternoon a lot of, the government should do X, government should do Y, but I think we're about building partnerships here. And so I think we'll come back to that in a minute on how do we reflect on that. Alison, on the original question, sort of building this overall AI ecosystem in Canada, what do you think are some of the key components?
So you had 5, I have 5 too. So, so maybe I'll just touch on them super quickly, and I think each of them could be, multiple PhD theses, of course. So you talked about talent, that's important, obviously. I'd also like to add labor. And there's a bunch of components to that. Obviously, I'm in a union-backed pension plan. I look at the jobs of our pensioners. A lot of those are disruptible, and that's probably true in any of our organizations. So, and never mind the sorts of jobs that are going to change. So, in addition, obviously, to universities, I also think there's a really important component for colleges. In our portfolio, and actually, our colleague at AIMCO mentioned this, we've got lots of, for lack of a better word, sort of devices that are looking to balance, grid load. Those are all installed by technicians. I don't know if anyone's installed a heat pump in their house yet. I have. I had like 10 guys there for a week because no one knew how to do it and they were all learning. And this was just like last year. So just to give you, they couldn't sell it. They didn't know how to they didn't know how to finance it. Anyway, that's just one little story. But the point is, this is not just about expensive AI engineers, which I know we also need to worry about. It's also about normal people and normal jobs. So talent. Second is compute power. I'm sure you talked a lot about that today. Third and related is the geopolitical component, which I think is going to be really critical for Canada. So in terms of governments, just how do we foster some of these global alliances? I think our foreign policy is going to be a really important key here. A fourth one, I said this on my earlier panel, I don't know how I got double duty, I'm sorry for all of you having to listen to me, is really our clean energy competitive advantage, which I'd love us to have. And we have so much regulatory uncertainty around that. It's highly problematic on a whole bunch of levels. So I think that would be a fourth area. And a fifth and related, and you touched on this, is really call it AI regulation. There's going to be lots of debate around this internationally. We obviously have voluntary standards, which I frankly applaud the government for getting rolling. But if this isn't rolled out in a responsible way, where there's some regulatory comfort, it's very hard for investors over the long term to really do their part. So for Canada, I think it's going to really be sort of probably between Canada and the UK, unfortunately we're close cousin countries, to figure out if we can actually put together a more proactive and responsible regulatory regime around this, where perhaps with the social media companies we were a little late to the party. So that's the fifth area. So talent, labor, compute, regulation, geopolitics, and clean energy are my 5.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the things is that we put the list together of things that we thought we would hear about today. And the team put a great list of together. But there was one that to me sort of didn't show up as much. And I think it's related to the AI adoption side. Because one of the things we know about adoption is you have to see successful stories of others before people often want to get into this. And we didn't talk as much about how we would celebrate successes. No one had I was going to call it a boondoggle, I was going to say an international trade trip around the world to sell Canadian AI. We talk about where we have a place on the podium, and we don't do those sort of things. I guess where I'd like it to turn us, and then there was an earlier quote of, Canadians have the lowest level of trust in technology in general in the OECD, and also in AI in specific. We have a broad societal perception, maybe even before we're able to get into some of the discussions around how do we regulate and how do we come to societal consensus. How do we make people realize the positive side? Because we are properly being warned about the negative side of AI. How do we talk about the successes? How do we make Cohere as regular a word that everyone has heard about as Google on the side first? Salim, do you want to take a...
Yeah, I think, from our perspective collectively, I think we have to talk more about how the application of AI in different sectors makes the life of the general Canadian better. We have problems in healthcare. We have problems in housing. We have problems in education. This technology, well, I don't think technology alone is going to solve this problem, but I think that the creative use of these technologies can really unlock value in different ways that Canadians will sort of see, wow, what an incredible way for us to address and modernize some of these areas. And then how do we take these incredible innovations and export them around the world? So we really need to start thinking about our innovation strategy, not simply just as a policy, but how do we use it to tackle fundamental issues that are important for Canada, and then how do we make that exportable around the world, because then we can create industries where Canada can win. And I think we need to talk more about that. How many of you today in the room had ever envisioned that robotic arms could build homes in factories in a matter of days? Probably none of you.
One day.
Yeah, and it's happening. And it's happening in our own backyard. And we have an opportunity to build an entire industry around this. And we at Radical chose to invest in Promise Robotics, not because they were a great Canadian company, but these founders were the absolute best in the world and had a bold vision for what they wanted to do. And they wanted to solve this problem here in Canada first and take it global. And I think we need to be telling more of those stories. Same with Intrepid Labs and others.
Yeah.
I think that we don't talk about just these bold entrepreneurs that want to win from here and are doing things that are going to touch Canadians' lives in meaningful ways, not to mention creating the jobs for our kids as the Canadian economy transitions, and we want to create opportunities that are going to be exciting for our children.
Any thoughts on how to do that beyond a TikTok account?
I would start a national internship program where we can get our graduates into startups across the country.
Okay. Joel?
So I think an important point that's been raised many times before is that the newspaper article shouldn't have AI in the title. It's solving some other problem first. So it's the construction problem, or it's a health problem, or something like that. And AI happens to be the way. Even we heard earlier that MindBridge was an AI-first company. I don't think so to their customers so much. It was more about the auditing and saving time and being more efficient and being more accurate. And so I think that yes, we should have interns. We should be celebrating these stories, but remember that it's solving a key problem in a really innovative way.
Great. Alison?
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely, and I want to latch on to the point you made about the use case and how those are understood. Probably for most of us right now, our experience is like we went on to ChatGPT, we queried something, it produced something crappy, and we moved on. No, probably not in this room, but in the average room. Everyone here, of course, has perfect prompts. So that doesn't engender a ton of trust. But there are so many use cases which do. I was just rereading this book right here, and there's a columnist called Kevin Carmichael who wrote a really interesting anecdote about wanting to get a mole checked. So he had a mole, and so of course it was an 8-month wait to go see the dermatologist. So he just kind of stressed the entire time he had skin cancer. He gets there, the derm takes one look at it and says, "No, that's just an age spot." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I've taken your time." And he said, "Oh no, I do 12 or 14 of these a day." Of just telling people it's an age spot. You mentioned this, we have a healthcare kind of shortage. Is that really a good use of anyone's time? So things like those kinds of applications and those sorts of, so there's a big, again, this is hard, it's easy to say storytelling, but I am on the board of a couple media companies, and I do think, this is a really important narrative to get right. So for the community to actually engage very intentionally and thoughtfully with the media on this, so that the use case is not, a false bio that they pulled up on the internet, but it's actually a real lived example where someone's life is improved, will really help build that trust.
Yeah, it's sort of, you sometimes wonder how much the off the diagonal negative story takes us to a much more dark place about thinking about the possibilities versus, say, Intrepid Labs, where no one would have heard that story and got, "Oh, the AI is a bad thing." It would have said that this can transform our lives in a way. One of the questions that I'd like you to think about is, where would you start? Where would you start with somebody who maybe is not familiar with AI at all, and you wanted to bring them into this mix, either maybe helping them fund something, asking them to come forward and talk about a compute? I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who are in those traditional sectors of construction, agriculture. You show them one deep fake and they want to shut down. They don't want to have the conversation about what's going on because it's intimidating. How do we bring more people into this fold of discussion?
I think one idea that could be an interesting opportunity is for us to create innovation sandboxes sector by sector. There is starting to be some experimentation that the banking sector is starting, and the construction sector is starting, and the life sciences sector is starting. How do we make that experimentation more visible so that that companies in those industries can understand some of the emerging use cases, the ROI, how they need to think about the talent that they have within their organization, understand if there's some best practices here that can allow them to really internalize these opportunities within their own companies, and how do we make all of this broad AI discussion meaningful for their business? And I think there is an opportunity to, help businesses educate them, help them learn, and ultimately then start to get them engaged. And that's sort of one way to potentially think about growing the awareness. And I'm not just simply worried about the large companies across Canada, but how do we also motivate small and medium business across Canada to understand where AI fits as it relates to their business? And until we talk more tangibly about what are the problems that we're solving, how is this technology going to uniquely add value, and here's why you should be paying attention to it, I think everyone's going to continue to feel confused and have a glaze across their eyes.
So there's more than one type of value we're talking about here. One is for the large companies, for the small and medium, and for the startups. So there are different values there. It's also, as I think Sam mentioned it first, that there's a difference between increased productivity versus new revenue opportunities or new capabilities. And so there's a variety of value that can be realized. I really like the idea of sandboxes. We're trying something small inside the National Research Council. What we've done for this summer is we hired 22 students. So they're all students who've built some generative AI tool in the past. We brought them in. They have two supervisors. One person is an expert in AI, and the other supervisor is a subject matter expert for some part of the organization. So something that they have to do in finance or in project management or something. And this is teaching that other supervisor the possibilities. At the end of the summer, there will be business cases from each of the, did it work? And what do we have to pay in order to implement this? So I would love to see that idea grown much bigger and implemented for companies. So let's have a system of students who are from Amila or Vector or Amy who come into an incubator, they've got AI compute, and they solve problems for agriculture or something like that. That would be excellent. And NRC volunteers to help convene. So if you have an idea, I've got lots of cards here, and let's get that started.
Alison.
I mean, this is a tricky one. I'm very grateful, and I mentioned this on the earlier panel about the space that my leadership of my organization has given for us to figure some of this stuff out. So there's probably an imperative for everybody in whatever organization they're in to say, actually, have I given the space for the culture and the patience for that culture to develop? Yes or no. Probably most of us would say, we could probably do it a little better. So it might just be it's going to have to be 1,000 small things, bluntly, particularly because there's going to be lots of reasons to not trust AI, and we're going to hear those loud and clear. So in addition to people being very intentional around building those kind of use cases and making those understood, I do think we also have to develop call it a maturity, probably starting with the old people, like me, and let the space for the next cohort of smart people to actually work this through in our everyday organizational lives, because we're just going to have to develop maturity about this, and I can't really practically think of any other way than just giving people the space for that culture to build and grow in whatever power remits we have within our organizations.
Yeah. One of the things we've done, and we'll turn to some questions from the audience in a second here, but one of the things we've heard a lot about is talent. And one of the things as an educator that comes through my mind is it's not quite 2 years ago since ChatGPT became something that rolled off everyone's tongue. In about 3 years from now, kids graduating from university will not remember going to university. They'll have always had access to these tools. They'll be AI native very, very quickly. And so we're talking about programs, when Stephen was talking about 12 to 18 months. By that point in time, we're going to be graduating students who have always used AI tools as part of their process. Joel, you sort of talked a little bit about the idea of pairing up people within the organization and bringing in interns. Are there anything else that you're doing at NRC to sort of get people ready to take advantage of these new skills?
It's a trade-off always, because we're trying to do it responsibly, but we want to make every tool possible available as quickly as possible. So we provided access to OpenAI tools in a business confidential environment. So we call it protected B inside the government. And so everybody in our organization can use this tool with their they can do promotion cases or whatever. So it's a safe tool for them to be using. We want to move to audio, we want to move to video, we want to move to all of these tools, but we're doing it step by step. Our next step is to take to make it possible for any part of the organization to have their own document repository that you can ask questions, you can apply AI to. So you get the sense from those examples that we want to introduce all the tools to everybody. And we have a communication strategy for doing that, but we're going slowly.
Okay. Alison?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry,
It's more focused on, it's a little bit, and I guess part of it comes from my own experience, and many people probably in this room. We learned tools about how to use spreadsheets in the 1980s. And then we went to work in 1988, 1989 in Nortel, and your boss looked at you like you were nuts because you were using a spreadsheet to analyze 10,000 circuit boards. That was not something that could be done on index cards. We're going to have that same level, but maybe exponentially different with these students and graduates and new people coming in the workforce who are literally probably going to blow some of our minds and our senior colleague minds.
Thank goodness.
But senior colleagues are sometimes going to be 30 years old who are not. Anything that comes to mind in OPTrust that?
I mean, definitely I would say that, a similar point I made before, I think kind of for senior leadership to have the humility and, I just think the culture setting is so critical on this stuff, I guess is my main point, if I may say it one more time. And you have to have leadership that is willing to say, I don't know, I'm curious, can someone help figure this out? That doesn't happen, at least in my, now 30-year professional career, nearly as much as it could. And so that's why I sort of made the point previously. I'm grateful that has happened, and I think this is an example of where we're just going to have to do that in spades. There are, I'm not an expert on this topic by any stretch, but there are a whole host of skills that we're going to need as a society to, steward through this revolution. There's all the technical skills. I'm not going to have those skills. God bless my liberal arts degree, I have other skills, right? So we've got to really be thoughtful about the, variety. And I intentionally brought up that sort of technical implementation on the ground skills, and so I find oftentimes in investing land, you can be very focused on, the fancy up here, and thinking less about kind of the whole societal transformation. So that's kind of one broad comment. A second comment I'll make is just around the role in governance. And I know, I'm going to take advantage of Ivey here, but I know you do a lot of executive education and governance training and things like that. Probably any of us who are either on boards or interfacing with boards, it's like, okay, so what are you doing about AI? And it's like, what do you want to know? So how can those of us who are in sort of board roles also help management steward that properly, right? So sometimes that's the level of the question you're getting. So we have an answer, but is that really what they want to know? Yeah. So I think there's also something really interesting around, and there's lots of courses, I mean, I get spammed them all the time, but for an institution like yours, I think a chance to really help, executives and board members ask really good questions of their organization and help them curate that kind of cultural evolution would be a great contribution probably for this room here.
Yeah, I'm smiling partly because Brian Benjamin, our director of Ivey Academy, would be upset. If you go to our website, you will find various executive education courses starting, and that we'll be broadening that out. Opportunity. Salim, a little bit of family on this topic?
Yeah, there's no doubt that we need to have our student population playing with this technology, understanding how it affects functional areas of business, understanding how it affects leadership and the decisions that leaders are going to make. And so I think that, either through the case method or through experience labs that we can set up that might be sector oriented, I think there's an incredible opportunity for learning and discussing the art of the possible. I think a second idea, and I'm going to steal this from Mahmood, is I do think as business leaders, we do need to understand how we work constructively with government. Government in many of these sectors are going to be important partners for us, and we need to understand, how government functions, where there is common ground to really develop partnerships. And I don't think we talk enough about that at a business school. And then thirdly is how can we help government become better adopters of technology and innovation? There's some great examples that you've mentioned, but is there a role for a business school to play to really help support the initiatives that are happening to make government faster and better adopters of these technologies so that we can help drive more efficient government and ultimately have government make decisions on this sector because they understand it themselves because they're using it and they really appreciate the tensions that exist in a real world rather than just a theoretical world.
Okay. And certainly one of the things that comes through my mind is if organizations aren't prepared to take advantage of these skills, people will go be entrepreneurs to take advantage of these skills, and they will build those elements out. Questions from the audience?
Yeah, I just had a comment that when we were talking about regulation and government regulation around this, it struck me that the challenge wasn't that the AI regulations were a problem. It was actually it struck me that the AI regulations were not in general what we heard as the problem for companies. It was actually the industry related problems. And so I think about the example on the Promise Robotics and
Permitting, yeah.
Pardon me?
Permitting.
Yeah. It was so we start building these processes to solve industry problems that makes the industry be ready to act or respond faster, and the regulation in that industry is what's the challenge. It's not necessarily the AI challenge. So it's back to your comment about getting government to understand how industry is evolving so that they get the regulations right around that. I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong on that, but it feels like that's one of our big challenges right now.
I'll take something, Joel?
So I'll just mention that the construction industry in Canada is very paper-based. It's very slow. And there's a huge opportunity for new companies if they would like to step in and help out the robotics. The National Research Council is in charge of the national construction codes, and so we have people who are mapping this space. So if people are interested in that very paper-based, so we heard that a lot of digital companies are competing in the digital world. Well, this is a case where you're still competing in the non-digital world.
Yeah. And I would say that there was about a 30-year period when people were in MBA programs, everyone read The Goal at some point in time, and you had the Herbie, and what was the bottleneck? And one of the things we have to be careful about is racing ahead in one part of the AI ecosystem and leaving all the other parts behind so we don't actually see real productivity improvements that show up over time. I think should we do one more? Okay, it's your time that I'm taking away from.
And I'll just, be honest that I think there is industry concern about the AI regulations themselves. I would be dishonest if they come and see me a lot. But to the point, I do think that it's a maturing dialogue, and I think that if I could kind of lay out a pathway or maybe a challenge about where we get to is when we started on privacy modernization 7 years ago, the industry that had written the standard that is now the Personal Information and Protection of Electronic Documents Act said, like, started from a place of like, thou shalt change nothing. Everything is perfect. Everything is working extraordinarily well, which it was potentially from an industry perspective. And where we had to get folks to is to say, like, I'll show you my reality, which is I get 25,000 letters a day from angry Canadians saying my data is being ripped off and I don't have any control and I'm super mad. And so we were able to evolve that conversation from a place of everything's perfect to like, let's regulate everything. And I think we're getting to that space on AI regulations, which is like the notion that nothing is going to happen or that we'll do only what the US will do or that we'll only do, now we need to be interoperable, but I do think we need to mature the conversation, and I do think that means that we need to really understand each other. And I think that takes time and it takes lots of kind of dedicated effort, but I think there's open doors, which is good.
Thanks. Quick reaction?
Yeah, if I can just make one comment. I think when we think about this AI space, I think the broad narrative is we don't have our act together and we're screwing it up. And I think what I hope you hear today is just how many bold people in this room are actually rolling up their sleeves and doing the hard work, whether it's ISED, and NRC, and government, whether it's PSP, OPTrust, AIMCO, whether it's U of T and all of the AI institutes, and then most importantly, the incredible founders that are building the world-class companies. They are the heroes of this story. And I just want to have you leave the room with a sense of optimism that there are people here and organizations here that appreciate and understand the magnitude of what we have in front of us. Yes, there is still more work to be done. And yes, we need to navigate around some tricky areas, but there is good work being done, and it's an incredible starting point for us to have.
And huge opportunity.
Good comment.
Thanks. Joel or Alison, anything else? Or?
I think that's a great
place to end.
I don't want to wreck that.
I was going to say, I'm going to just leave the stage at this point in time. Thanks very much for taking the time.